The US Justice Department has charged Chinese tech firm Huawei with multiple offences, including fraud, raising US-China tensions. Phil Calvert is a senior fellow at the China Institute at the University of Alberta in Canada, and he joins us now via Skype from Victoria, Canada. Phil Calvert, welcome. So first of all, before we get into the details of the charges, as someone who watches US-China relations closely, how big a rupture is this in this relationship?
I think this is going to be significant, Joel. China has perspective on the United States and others that U.S. and the West are trying to contain China, restrict Huawei's growth, restrict Huawei's international as a competitor to them. So seeing how China reacted to the arrest of Meng Wanzhou in Canada and their fierce response to this detention and the possible extradition, I think we can see a strong reaction from China against the U.S. now coming probably very soon.
And you describe it as a fierce response already that there's been. In that fierce response, do you include the detention by the Chinese of multiple people, including two Canadians and an Australian?
Absolutely. Certainly for the Canadians, it was a clear response. In fact, China's ambassador to Canada inadvertently admitted that in an article that was published, and it's been referred to a couple of times. Certainly by the way they handled the appeal for Robert Schellenberg and raising it to a death sentence and inviting reporters to come to the appeal hearing so they could see him sentenced to death was clearly another reaction. And yes, I think because Australia has, as a close ally of Canada, has supported Canada in protest against the Australian citizen.
So if you were a foreigner in China at the moment, would you be a bit nervous?
Yes, I would be, and I know foreigners in China who are a bit nervous, and some who have traveled to Canada and have decided not to go back for the time being until they get a better sense of the lay of the land.
And so what is the lay of the land today now after these charges were announced in the last hour or so?
Well, until now, the target has been Canada and Canadians, and the response has been against Canada and by extension, I think, the Australian citizen as well. I think this broadens China's attack, really, and China will respond now, I think, against the United States. Of course, China has reacted against Canada for a number of reasons. One was because we took action against Meng Wanzhou in accordance with our China-U.S. Extradition agreement. But also because, Canada's smaller and Australia is smaller. If you're going up against the U.S., it's a lot tougher. But what I think this will do is complicate the trade talks. And I know the United States has said that they would like to keep this separate from the trade talks. But I think in reality, China is going to see it as one whole. And I think that will complicate some of the discussions they're having.
Okay, so run through the charges for us, but basically, and what do you believe that the strength of the case is against Huawei?
Well, there were a number of charges against for Huawei, basically theft of trade, theft of trade secrets. I think they're concerned about cyber espionage as well. And this reflects a lot of concerns that other countries, companies, the United States in particular, but also Australia, have expressed about Huawei. Some of the behavior Huawei has shown in its international activities, in implanting of certain devices into some of its technology. But also in terms of theft of technology, this is a part of a broader picture that we're seeing in China, where it's increasing problems with whether under joint venture agreements or whether in other ways, China has systematically been taking technology from foreign partners.
Were you surprised at all at some of the language used in that media conference describing the actions of the Chinese, saying they were that Huawei repeatedly refused to accept US law, it sought to steal valuable property. We should all be concerned about any company beholden to a foreign government that tries to burrow into our telecommunications network. It's it was fairly fierce, a fierce description of what was allegedly going on.
I wasn't really surprised because that's the kind of language that the U.S. administration has been using on these issues and against China. So I think it was consistent with with the approach the U.S. has been taking, certainly publicly, on some of these issues. And they've been also very putting a lot of pressure on allies and urging Canada, for example, not to accept Huawei into its 5G network as a participant in that. So I'm not surprised that the reaction was strong. Huawei has been a target of the United States under this administration.
And what can you tell us about the situation with the Canadian ambassador to China, who was effectively sacked because he had argued that Meng Wanzhou had a reasonable case?
Yes. John McCallum, after a cabinet retreat, he met with some Chinese language media in his former riding, because John McCallum is a former minister. And he said basically that he thought, as you said, Meng Wanzhou had a strong case, and he outlined what he said was suggestions that this is politically motivated, and those sorts of claims that, of course, the Chinese side has been making about it. So that was completely off message from what the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and the Canadian government have been saying, which is this is a case that's going to be settled by rule of law. We're acting within our Canada-U.S. extradition treaty, and the strong message has been about rule of law and not about politicalization of this case. So he did it once, and he was reprimanded, and he withdrew his comments. And then 2 days later, in a restaurant in Vancouver, he said something similar. Again, it was a lot of talking about things that if you're going to talk about these things, you talk about them privately and not publicly as the representative of the government of Canada.
Yeah. Okay, Phil Calvert, thanks for talking to us. It's going to be so interesting seeing how this plays out with those court cases when the details come out in a month's time or so. Okay, thanks for talking to us from Victoria, Canada.
Thank you very much.
The latest ranking of state and territory economies shows New South Wales and Victoria are the top economic performers. CommSec's State of the States report also shows home building is expected to decline. Ryan Felsman is a senior economist with CommSec, and he joins us now from Sydney. Ryan Felsman, welcome. So talk us through the basics of this report.
Well, Joe, CommSec releases a report on a quarterly basis which looks at the economic performance across all Australian states and territories.